Hey guys, we're just going to continue along today, just highlighting a few of the most important things about this chapter so that way we have everything we need to know. We start here in Mexico. We're talking about the Mexican persecution of Christians. In the 1920s, there was a revolution in Mexico where, just like in Europe, it was very anti-religious, anti-Catholic. There was a group called the Cristeros, which were the Christian group, the Catholic group, that banded together to fight this oppression. And this is where we hear about Blessed Miguel Bro. He was a Jesuit priest. He was known as the master of disguises because he would disguise himself to get around and to bring people the sacraments and to pray with families and do what he needed to do. His execution was publicized. That was the goal of the government and the revolutionaries, was to publicize how gruesome of a death he suffered. He faced the firing squad, and when he was in the last last moments of his life, he knelt down and extended his arms like Christ on the cross, and he yelled out, "Viva Cristo Rey! Long live Christ the King!" And they publicized this, and it actually inspired people to fight and to stand up against this violent revolution. Many Catholics were put to death under this, and it continues to today to Mexico, still strict on many religious expressions. Back to Europe, talk about the Nazi persecution. There was this thing issued called the Concordat of 1933, which was a deal between the Vatican and the Nazis, believe it or not. This treaty allowed Catholic institutions to operate free from Nazi influence in Germany. The treaty was never honored by the Nazis, believe it or not. It was almost ignored entirely. And that prompted this letter that was written called Mit Brennender Sorge, smuggled into Germany from Pope Pius XI that condemned Nazism. So this is the church's official declaration against Nazism, against everything that was going on there. Hitler was enraged that this letter that was smuggled into the country was publicized. He rounded up Catholic leaders and had them killed. He shut down all Catholic institutions and newspapers. And this is where we find our Marianist martyr during this time, Father Jacob Gopp. Great love for the poor. He preached against Nazi ideology. The Gestapo started to follow Gopp. He had to escape to France and Spain. They found him. He was tricked, and he was brought back to Germany, and he was condemned to death in 1943. Anti-Semitism abounded, not by the church, but by people in Europe, specifically Germany. Pius XI spoke out against this. Then there was this night, Kristallnacht, which means the night of glass, where all of the Jewish neighborhoods were raided and smashed, and this is when the beginning of the concentration camps come into play. Over in Spain, we're having a civil war, and the church is again being affected by this. This is where our Marianist martyrs of Spain come from. All of these seven guys, were all martyrs during this time. You don't need to know their names. You just need to know that there are Marianist martyrs in Spain, and that's when that happened. Section 6, Pope Pius XII. Pius XII is, you could think of him as the World War II Pope. He was the Secretary of State for Pope Pius XI. They believe that he wrote that letter that was smuggled into Germany. He was made like the author of it, even though it was Pius XI's name on it. And what do we have from him? We have one encyclical where he condemns war, anti-Semitism, Nazis, Soviets, and he protects the Jews. This is something that we're only learning about really today. During World War II, Pope Pius XII developed something like the Underground Railroad during World War II, during the Civil War in the U.S. It was called the Assisi Underground. It was a secret network of residences, households, monasteries that the Jews could find protection in and hide away. And it was believed he saved, the number right now is 860,000, but we're finding out more and more of things that he did that kept secret that helped Jewish families and Jewish communities survive. So it could be over 1 million people that he saved during World War II. So Pius XII and World War II go hand in hand. Section 7, Maximilian Kolbe. We talked about him. We talked about him in the beginning of the year when we talked about somebody who lays down their life for another person, where sainthood is involved. He was a Franciscan priest. He had a vision of Our Lady when he was young. Our Lady offered him 2 crowns, a crown of purity and a crown of martyrdom, and he chose both. When asked to choose, he says, I choose both. I'm skipping over some things. He founded the Militia of the Immaculate. It was an order from Mary. He spoke out against the Nazis, opened monasteries to offer Jews safe hiding. He was arrested twice and second time sent to Auschwitz. One day, 3 men tried to escape the camp. 10 men were chosen to be starved to death as punishment and to discourage any future attempts to escape the death camp. One of these men broke down and asked to be spared because he had a wife and children. Father Kolbe asked to take his place, and the guards allowed it. Kolbe went 2 weeks in a bunker without food or water. Finally, he was executed. This is that offering of life. He gave his life in place of this man who had a wife and children. That man survived, so did his wife and children, and they were present at the canonization of St. Maximilian Kolbe. Another saint from the Holocaust, we have St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. Her name was Edith Stein when she was born. She was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family, but soon became an atheist in her youth. One day she asked her professor, who was also atheist, if he had to choose a religion to belong to, which would it be? And to her surprise, he said Catholicism. She's shocked. She said, why would you be Catholic of all things? And he said, because no other religion has produced somebody as great as St. Francis of Assisi and his love for the poor and all the good works in the world that have happened because of him. So this kind of made her start to think. And she started to read more about the church, particularly Thomas Aquinas, because she was a philosopher as well. A friend gave her the autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila that we've already talked about, and this was her turning point. This was what changed her entire life. She was baptized on New Year's Day in 1922 and entered the same order that Teresa of Avila belonged to, the Carmelites. So she becomes a Carmelite nun, takes the new name Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Teresa after Teresa of Avila. She asked the Pope to speak out against the Nazis. The Nazis targeted her because she was born Jewish, and eventually they took her and her sister and rounded them up, and they were both executed in the concentration camps. Section 9. After World War II, what is the world like? Well, now we know that the Soviets, the Americans, the British, we were the ones who won the war. So what was Europe like? Well, the Soviets really had a big hand in reshaping Europe, and we have those Eastern European countries behind this Iron Curtain where communism dominated. This would be Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, which was then Czechoslovakia, and the countries that are now all independent but were part of the Soviet Union. Worry spread as communism increased. Pius XII warned any who is connected to communism would be excommunicated. This was very serious because communism at this time was so anti-Catholic, anti-religious. In the United States, what do we have? We have Al Smith, who's the first who's the governor of New York, first Catholic to run for president. John F. Kennedy is the first Catholic president of the United States. We have Bishop Fulton Sheen, who is a popular TV show host. He won an Emmy for his Catholic show that was on every night, or every week, I'm sorry. Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, some names that we know about. Just hitting the most important stuff. Pius XII's teachings. He gave us the infallible teaching of the Assumption of Mary. He allowed more vernacular in the liturgy. Little preview of what's to come. We have Section 10, St. Padre Pio. He was a Franciscan friar in Italy. He had this gift of reading souls, which is very interesting. It means that when people were in confession with him, he could kind of sense deeper things in their life that they needed to confess, and he could be able to help them confess those things and be a better Christian afterwards. He was the first priest to receive the stigmata. I jumped over that just a second ago. He had the stigmata for 50 years. No other time did a priest ever receive the stigmata. And as the last thing is, there's this miracle that happened. This is crazy in the iBook. There was a girl born with no pupils in her eyes. So her eyes just had the color of the iris, right? That's what that's called. She received her first communion from Saint Padre Pio, and after that, she was able to see, although she still has no pupils in her eyes. So that doesn't make sense scientifically. The light has to enter through the pupil, the hole in your eye. And she doesn't have this, yet she still can see. She actually reads at Mass today. It's one of the miracles associated with him. His body is incorrupt. There's pictures in the iBook. And that's really everything that we have to say about this chapter. One last thing is that Padre Pio's great nephew was a alum of Kellenberg Memorial. So he has family in the States, and some of them have gone to Kellenberg. That's also in the iBook if you guys want to take a look. All right, guys. That's this chapter. Thanks very much. We'll run through chapter 14 starting tomorrow, and we'll be all set for the end of the trimester. Thank you very much.